if you would like to revisit certain sections later, you'll be able to do that. So by the end of today's workshop, you should be able to describe how to research and what to research about a company before you have an interview. You'll be able to define the difference between a hypothetical and behavior-based questions. You'll be able to demonstrate how to use the STAR method to answer a behavioral-based question in an interview. And you'll be able to describe the kinds of questions to ask and not ask in an interview. And then you'll also be able to describe how to prep for an interview. So throughout today's workshop, we would love for you to use the chat window to ask and respond to questions. So we would love to have your interaction. So we'll get started with that. The first thing we're going to talk about is what to do before an interview. And because you want the interviewer to believe that you're the best fit for the position, you can score a lot of points by doing some really basic research beforehand. Knowledge is power. It's going to help you understand the company better, what they do, develop questions, and build your confidence. So the last thing you want to do is walk into an interview and say, so what does this company do? And you may think that that couldn't possibly happen, but I've heard from employers that we work with that it definitely does. So doing research before an interview, whether it's over the phone or face-to-face, is an easy way to make a really good first impression. So we're going to jump right in with an activity to show you how to find some basic information about a company. And we're going to put you into breakout rooms for this to answer 3 questions. So before we move on, please download the job description using the link that Piper is going to put into the chat. I think she's also going to upload the document itself. So if you could grab those, I'm going to pause for a few seconds while everybody has a chance to get those. We've got that. We got a little bit more time. And so your mission as a group in your chat, in your breakout room is going to be to answer these 3 questions. What does the company do? How do they describe their values and culture? And who is one person in the company leadership and their job title? So you can work as a team in your group to do this. You can find the answers to these questions either in the job description on the company's website or on LinkedIn. And you'll want to either take a screenshot of these questions, or you can copy the questions out of the chat. I believe Piper's got that in there as well. So you've got 5 minutes to do this, so it's going to move pretty quickly. You probably want to split up the questions amongst the group once you get into the chat. And we'll pop in to see if you have any questions. Crystal will put you into the breakout rooms, and then she'll give you a 1-minute warning when we're getting close to coming back. And then when time runs out, she'll bring everybody back to the main session. Very good. Okay, well, I think we have everybody back. So who would like to share what their group found? Do we have any brave souls? You can put your answers into the chat, or you can read them out loud, either way. Maybe I can get a volunteer. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So me and now the first, our answer was kind of in like the first sentence of the description. So the company provides consulting, design, and manufacturing services for custom wireless products. And at first, when we're trying to look for the last 2 questions, we were just kind of ciphering through the document, and it wasn't until we clicked on the website that it kind of had everything laid out and organized well enough for us to find the answers right away. So as far as the organization's values, it was right there on the front page at the bottom, and one of the team members and their position. For example, Dave Thompson, who is a director of program management. And so it has a description there. So it's very efficient and easy to find.
Awesome. Very good. Have you ever done that kind of thing before? Have you ever tried to look up that kind of information?
Yeah. Oftentimes, like before an internship that I recently did, I would, search up and do research on the certain professor, and then look at the institution as well, past research that they've done, and just kind of get an idea of the work environment. So this was a really good exercise that kind of mimicked something that I like to practice.
Yeah, very good. Anybody else want to share? Did anybody use LinkedIn? Did anybody try that besides the website and the job description? Did anybody, or does anybody use that tool when they're looking? Doing research about companies? Let me see, we have one comment in the chat. Okay, maybe not. All right, well, I don't want to spend too much time on this. Just hopefully this exercise has shown you that it's very easy to find valuable information about a company in just a couple of minutes. Oops. There we go. All right. So doing research before the interview is going to be the best way to learn, obviously, what the company does. And just as importantly, what are they looking for in a candidate? Having this information is going to help you feel more prepared to answer questions when you're in the interview. And it's also, as we talked about before, it's going to boost your confidence. So there are many items that you could search before an interview, but there are kind of 7 key things that you definitely want to be looking for. The first one is, what do they do, obviously, and who do they serve? Who are their clients? What markets are they in? And then what are the skills and experience that the company values? You can look at the job description to get an idea about this. You can also look up the company and then search for the employees who work at that company on LinkedIn and see what they do, see what their background is. You want to try to figure out who some of the key players are in the organization. You can find that on the About Us page of the website and again on LinkedIn. You may want to look for news and recent information about the company, doing obviously a simple Google search, looking at the company website, see, check their social media, see what the company's culture, mission, and values are, at least what they say they are. Again, website, social media, and there's also a resource called Glassdoor that I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. And then learn what you can about the person or the people that are going to be interviewing you. Again, look them up on LinkedIn. So I pulled together a few articles in a handout called What to Research Before an Interview. And I encourage you to take a look at these resources, especially the tools that they suggest that you use in your research. And so Piper's going to put a link to that article in the chat. And again, we do have all this stuff pulled together for you later as well. And so the one resource that I mentioned there briefly, Glassdoor, if you haven't heard of it, it's a website that has inside scoop on companies. And this website does require you to create an account, but it also gives you access to comments that either current or former employees will leave on the site to talk about what it's like to work there. Does anybody have any questions about what to research before an interview before we move on? All righty. Well, again, at any time, if you have any questions, make sure you put them in the chat, but otherwise we will keep moving. All right, so let's talk about what happens in the actual interview. One thing is for sure, you're going to get asked some questions and you want to be able to answer them succinctly and to the best of your ability. There are essentially 2 types of interview questions, hypothetical and behavior-based questions. So let's take a look at what those things mean. A hypothetical question is one that asks you what you would do if a particular situation were to come up. And it usually begins with something like, what would you do if? Hypothetical questions generally are not going to be used by employers because the interviewer could simply make up an answer. Most employers instead are going to ask behavior-based questions. These questions ask about your experience with a particular situation, what you actually did versus what you might do. Since past performance can be a good predictor of future actions, interviewers ask behavior-based questions to determine whether or not a candidate has the skills and experience that are required to succeed in the job that they have. Behavior-based questions are generally going to start with, tell me about a time when, or describe a situation where, or give me an example of. For example, tell me about a time when you had a disagreement with a coworker would be a behavior-based question. These questions are going to require you to explain the situation and what action you took to respond to it. In short, you need to tell a story. Even if you have no work experience, the story that you tell can be associated with similar situations like class projects or volunteer work. While you won't know ahead of time exactly what questions you're going to get asked in the interview, you can assume that you're going to be asked about some basic topics such as your successes and strengths, how you handle mistakes, how you relate to others, and your working style. And knowing this, you can prepare some storylines that would work well for multiple questions. This is where the STAR method is going to be really helpful. STAR is an acronym. It stands for Situation, Task, Action, and Result. And it's a really great framework for storytelling. And why is having a framework important? Because without one, it's really easy to ramble in an interview, to leave out important information, to forget what you were talking about. Because when you're nervous, you could very well, as you very well could be in an interview, having a structure in mind for answering questions will help you stay focused. So let's take a closer look at the STAR method. Situation is exactly what it sounds like. You want to set the scene, what was happening, who was involved, what was the problem, what are the key things that someone needs to know to understand the situation. Task refers to what needed to be done to address the problem. Describe what your responsibility was in that situation. Perhaps you had to help your group complete a project within a tight deadline or resolve conflict with a coworker or teammate. Action is what did you actually do about it? Describe what you did in that situation and how you approached it. Use I statements instead of we statements so that your role in the story is clear. And then result is what happened? How does the story end? What did you learn or gain from the situation? So let's take a look at two examples. The first one here is going to answer the question, tell me about a time when you made a mistake at work and what you did about it. So using the STAR method to answer this question, we're going to begin by describing the situation. I was running a large copying job and I forgot to check which paper was loaded in the default tray. Instead of plain white paper, it was loaded with yellow paper left over from a previous job. So next is the task, and what you needed to do obviously was to correct the mistake and do it quickly to meet a deadline. Then we're going to talk about the action that was taken to solve the problem. I stayed late to rerun the job with the right paper and hand delivered the final copies to the department that needed them. I told my manager about the extra copies printed on the yellow paper. And finally, give the result of your actions. It turned out that the department that ordered the first set of copies was able to use the extra copies for another meeting. It would have been better not to make the mistake, but by admitting it, I was able to make use of the extra copies and deliver them ahead of schedule. I also learned to always check the paper tray before running a print job. So using the STAR method is going to give you that framework for providing detailed answers without rambling and without feeling like you need to memorize your responses. Here's our second example, and this one is going to answer the question, tell me about a time when you had to overcome a challenge. So first we're going to describe the situation. In my physics class, we had a group research project where each group member had a specific assignment to complete for our final paper. One of my teammates had a family emergency and wasn't able to complete their part of the project. So define the challenge. Next, the task. There was no option to change the deadline for the paper, and we had only a week to complete the project. Then we're going to talk about the action that you took to solve the problem. I made a list of the tasks that needed to be completed to cover the missing team member and created a timeline for when those tasks needed to be done and worked with the team to divvy up the tasks. When the deadline approached, I collected the research from the team and compiled it for the final project. And I worked with another team member to do the final editing. And then finally, the results of your actions. Amazingly, we finished the paper on time. The professor gave us an A on the project, and I received high scores from my teammates in the peer reviews. All right, so I know that was pretty fast. Next, we're going to take 20 minutes to go into breakout rooms so that you can work on creating your own response to an interview question using the STAR method. So before we move on to the instructions for the activity, Does anybody have any questions about the STAR method? All right, then I'm going to go ahead and move on to the instructions. All right. So what you're going to do is you're going to download the STAR examples from the chat. Piper has put that document into the chat, so please grab that. And then the question that we want you to work on creating a story for using the STAR method is tell me about a time when you had to overcome a challenge. The best way to go about this is to think of a couple of past situations that you can use to answer the questions, then go ahead and choose one and create an outline using the STAR method. Try to keep this short. You only have 20 minutes, so just a couple sentences to describe each piece. And then if you have time, go ahead and practice with one of us when we pop in. We'll give you a good 5 minutes, I think, to get started before we start popping into the breakout room, so we don't upset your brain waves. But try to practice with each other, and then we're going to be looking for a brave person to share what they were able to put together when we come back. Okay, very good. Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope that you found that went well. Would anybody be willing to share what they were able to put together? Don't worry if it's not perfect. We're in safe company here. Very good. Okay, thank you, Maria. All right, so the situation is I am a first generation student and I was starting college with little to no knowledge about how to make sure I stay on track, how to prepare myself for interviews and talk to companies, or how to succeed as an engineering student. And the task was that she had to learn. And the action that she took was I connected with a senior in SHIP. Oh, sorry, hang on a second. I forgot to turn off my timer. I connected with a senior in SHIP and she Zoom called me and showed me all of the information she knew. She gave me tips and I was able to learn from her and take notes and implement what she said successfully to my own college career. And the result was I learned how to reach out to people. I created mentorship relationships. I share that knowledge with other peers that are coming from a similar background. Wow, that's really great. Really good. My only feedback on that one was, well, no, never mind. That based on the question that we told you to answer, tell me about a time when you had to overcome a challenge. I guess that was a really good example. So never mind what I was going to say. Anybody else want to share, either reading it themselves or in the chat? A new message. Yeah, you're welcome. Good job. Thanks for sharing. It takes courage to share. So, all right. Well, if anybody else decides that they want to share, let us know. Otherwise, we're going to keep moving because I was hoping to get you out of here by 5 and off to dinner. So, all right. The great part about interviews is that you get to ask questions as well. And you're going to find hundreds of examples of what to ask in an interview in a Google search. So we're just going to touch on a few of the basics. I strongly encourage you to check out a website that I use all the time called The Muse, M-U-S-E. It has great advice on the job search process. And I pulled these questions from an article called 51 Great Questions to Ask in an Interview. And Piper just put that link into the chat as well. And so here are some basic things that you should be asking. What does a typical day look like here? What attributes does someone need to be successful in this position? How long have you been with the company? What's your favorite part about working here? What can you tell me about the team I'd be working with? How would you describe the work environment here? What are the next steps in the interview process? And may I answer any final questions for you? Depending on how much time you have, consider adding a few other questions that are sure to impress an interviewer. And those things are, what types of skills are you looking to add to the team with this hire? What are the most important things you'd like to see someone accomplish in the first 30 to 60 days on the job? What gets you most excited about the company's future? What are the current goals that the company is focused on, and how is this team involved? Can you tell me how your company approaches diversity, equity, and inclusion? There are also some questions that you're going to want to avoid asking in an interview. Again, I found a really great summary on the Muse in an article called Questions You Should Never Ask in a Job Interview. And Piper's going to put a link to that in the chat. The first one regarding salary and benefits, unless the interviewer brings it up first, you don't want to ask about these things until after the company gives you an offer, because you don't want to make it look like you assume that you already have the job. When you ask questions that start with why, be sensitive to that because it can make people feel defensive. You want to rephrase questions to be non-confrontational. So for example, instead of asking, why do you use AutoCAD instead of SolidWorks? You could say, what were the features of AutoCAD that made you choose this application over others? As a quick example. You never want to ask a question that is something that you could have easily found in a Google search. You don't want to ask about working from home unless it is implied in the initial job description or the interviewer brings it up. You generally don't want to ask about that. However, in the age of COVID, it's totally okay to ask how the company is working with COVID guidelines and how does that impact the team that you'd be working with. You don't need to say, would you like to see my references? Because they're going to ask you for your references when they are ready to get close to making a hiring decision and making an offer. So you don't need to offer those. Although you do want to have your list of references ready when you go into the interview, just in case they do ask for them. You don't want to ask the company whether or not they monitor social media accounts. That's kind of better left unsaid because it gives the impression that you may have something to hide. Always assume that they are going to do a Google search on you, of course, and it's just good practice to not post any negative comments about professors, supervisors, prior companies that you worked for, or your teammates, or other people on any of your social media accounts, Twitter, Instagram, and that sort of thing. And while it may be nice if all managers were professional interviewers, the reality is that there are many levels of expertise out there, so be aware of that. Some are very accomplished human resources professionals with years of training, and some are managers who may be excellent at their technical skills, but are not great at interviewing, or they don't have a lot of experience with that. So they may not really be aware of what is proper or even legal to ask in an interview. There are federal laws in place that protect individuals from discrimination in the recruiting and hiring process, and several topics that you should never be asked about, including things like race, color, national origin, religion, gender identity, pregnancy status, disability, age or genetic information, citizenship status, marital status, or the number of children that you may have. The type of questions that are asked in an interview can be really revealing about the company culture, so you want to keep that in mind as well. And while we don't have time to go in depth on this subject, we did find an excellent article on illegal interview questions and how to respond if you happen to be asked one during the hiring process. So Piper's going to put that a link to that article in the chat. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to go over is we're going to talk a little bit about a pre-interview game plan. So there are a few things that you're going to want to do to help you feel confident walking into the interview. So this is for in-person interviews. You want to scope out where the interview is. I strongly recommend printing out the directions and the contact information for the person that you're going to interview with, just in case you get to a place where your cell phone coverage is not coming in or your phone dies. Make a plan to arrive 10 minutes early. And make sure the day before that your clothes fit and that they're clean and not wrinkled. Make sure you use deodorant and brush your teeth. Print 5 copies of your resume and a few copies of your references, just in case they do ask for them. And make sure you bring along the questions that you plan to ask. And then if you've got some story examples, maybe jot down a few words or phrases for the ones that you want to use to help jog your memory once you get into the interview itself. In addition, there are a few things that you're going to want to bring along with you. As I mentioned, the printouts, put them in a nice folder or portfolio, bring along some pens and some kind of a notepad to take notes on. You should probably bring along a photo ID and a vaccination card, because depending on where you're going, you may need to show that to get into the building. You bring along business cards if you have them. Make sure you turn off your phone or put it into, what am I trying to say? Put it into just vibration mode so that it doesn't go off during the interview. And you really don't want to be looking at that phone at all during the interview. You could bring along a breath mint, pop that in when you arrive at the company so that you're all fresh before the interview starts. And of course, bring along your smile, because that's going to make a big difference. Some things that you're going to not want to bring with you into an interview are going to be gum or food. You don't want to bring along any drinks unless it's just like a bottle of water. You want to leave behind any excess jewelry, strong perfumes or aftershaves. Of course, a negative attitude, and don't bring your parents. Apparently there are people that do that, so don't be one of them. If you're scheduled for a virtual interview, keep these things in mind to look your best. You want to be aware of both your digital and your actual environment. So do the interview somewhere that has stable Wi-Fi. You want to find a quiet place, and you want to have a simple background. When you have a messy or busy background, it can be really distracting. So either find a plain wall or use the blur feature to blur your background. And check your camera angle. Make sure that your head is in the upper, like 2/3 of the screen, like a good photo. Don't put your phone or tablet or your laptop in your lap and look down at it. It looks like you're looking down into a hole, and nobody looks good from that angle. Find a way to hold your phone or tablet steady. Don't try to hand hold it if you're not using a laptop. And make sure that you have a link to the meeting. Arrive 2 minutes early, check your audio and video, and then mute yourself while you're waiting for the other person to show up. And again, make sure that your clothes fit and that they're clean. And I recommend put on the full outfit so that you really feel the part, even if it's just a virtual interview. No gum, no food. Check your teeth before the interview starts. And if you can, try to do the interview without headphones if possible, or if not possible, try to use the smallest ones that you can. All right, so we talked about a lot of stuff today. We went over what to research before an interview. We talked about the kind of questions that you could be asked, especially the behavior-based questions, how to use the STAR method to put together stories to answer those questions, what to ask and not ask in an interview. And we just quickly went over a game plan for those interviews. And again, we did create a Google Drive that has all of the resources from today's presentation. Piper's going to put a link to that in the chat. And we definitely want you to succeed in your next interview. And we hope that you have found these tools to be really helpful. This is the last of our job search workshops for the school year. You can access links to our previous quick skills workshops and links to all the articles that we shared today in a document called Resources from How to Be a Star. Piper's going to put a link to that in the chat. And the recording for today's workshop will be posted on the Scitec blog in the next week or so if there are any sections that you want to revisit. And then just real quickly, one last thing before we go, if you are looking for an internship, be sure to check out the Scitec internship program. We help college STEM majors connect to paid internship opportunities in small companies in Minnesota. And Scitec provides a wage match to the employer that helps them cover half of the intern's wages, which makes them very excited to use our program to find candidates. So there are new jobs that are posted every week. And once you're part of the program, you will get a new jobs email every Friday that tells you what was posted during the week. We do have almost over 60 spots that are still available for the summer. So they are filling up quickly. So if you are intending to do this, you'll want to get started. All of the eligibility requirements and the application are on our website, scitecmn.org. If you have any questions about Scitec, I encourage you to reach out to Piper at the email address on the screen, scitecmn@mintech.org. All right, so I apologize. We went a couple minutes over. We thank you so much for joining us. Hope that you'll have a great evening. And we will stick around here for a few minutes if anybody has any questions that they want to ask.